go with this number 2 on activity D. Okay, so here we've got Ha-isha esher shalacha. Is this one of them where you got a note saying, okay, we translated the relative pronoun differently, and there wasn't a really good explanation for why one is wrong versus the other? Now that I think about it, this is kind of a terrible exercise for him to give you because there's another layer of ambiguity here in the Hebrew. I really think that we should be doing this with full sentences, and I wonder if when we get to the full sentences, if he has... yeah, okay, so we'll look at some of the full translations and kind of point it out. So number 2 here, if you were to diagram this sentence in Hebrew, and let's do it in English to make it a little bit easier to see. So if we were to go through here, we could say, so here we've got... Oh boy, isn't that nice? Okay. What a mess this is. All right, so here we've got the woman, and then here we're just going to say for now, preliminarily, I usually just go with which as my sort of initial relative pronoun, and then I'll change it as I realize I might need to later. But which is the one that I think gives you the least amount of meaning, and so it's the most flexible one. Again, we'll have to check and see if we're correct. But okay, so now we've got shalacha, and what your peer reviewer is doing is he's translating shalacha as she sent. Now, shalacha can mean she sent. That's very possible. All right, so if this is how we should translate it, you could easily just give the translation, the woman which she sent. So what he does is he goes in and he changes which to that, the woman that she sent. Yeah, basically what we've got here is we could translate this either as the woman whom she sent, or another way to translate this is the woman who sent. How do you know that the woman is the object of sent versus the subject of sent? You don't know which is which. I need to avoid the which and that and whatever, but this phrase could easily be translated either as the woman whom she sent. Now, the way that you're going to tell the difference between these two phrases in like broader translations is you're going to look at which one makes more sense in context, but here you don't have that context. So how are you supposed to tell the difference? Well, the reason why it's ambiguous is because shalacha does not need to have an explicit subject. Shalacha itself doesn't mean she sent. Shalacha means sent. It's a verb. It's not a noun and a verb. It's just a verb. Now, in Hebrew, you can have a sentence without a noun. For example, in Hebrew, if we just had shalach, that would mean she sent. But there's no noun in the Hebrew sentence. The Hebrew sentence just has the verb. I guess what I'm saying is in your translation, you have the woman that she sent. So in yours, the woman is one person, and she sent, she is a different woman. You have 2 women in your translation, right? The woman that she sent. That's 2 different women. His translation, because he is saying that ha'ish is the subject of sent, that means that this is now a subjective relative pronoun, which would be the woman. And he could say the woman that sent. Like if you want to just use the same pronoun, yours is the woman that she sent, his is the woman that sent, but those are still 2 different sentences. And so this is even beyond the idea of restrictive or non-restrictive. What I would say to you is this. Both of your translations are legitimate translations of this phrase. They're both possible. So in that sense, I want you to feel comfortable knowing that what you got here, even if you just did it sort of intuitively and you can't explain exactly why you chose the wording you chose, you just feel like this is how I would say it in English, you got it correct. You didn't mistranslate it here. When he says my translation is more accurate, he's making an assumption that the woman is doing the action of sending, but there's nothing here in the Hebrew that says ha'ish is the subject necessarily.
Right.
In fact, I would say just with this context, your translation is probably the more likely to be the case, but both are possible. So I guess the long story short here is there is a certain degree of intuitiveness that comes with these translations because you don't have context. If we get to a place where you have a translation that's just incorrect, then I would want to look at that and say, okay, why is it that these, what was missed here so that we can make sure we correct anything? But at this point, on number 2, on activity D here, that both of those are possible. Is there any other one where you got a comment on there that you'd want to look at specifically why there's a difference?
Okay, so you have the definite article on every word, and yet none of these words actually use the word the in the English.
Right.
For attributive, that's what I was trying to think of, the attributive. And so, I don't understand why it's there in Hebrew and it doesn't come through in English.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's go through that here. So basically the way that the reason why there's that disconnect between Well, the definite article is being used in Hebrew, but the translations aren't using the definite article in English. What's going on? The reason for that disconnect is because the definite article has a different function in Hebrew. I mean, there are some places where the definite article of the two overlap, but what you're noticing here is that the definite article in Hebrew in these sentences is functioning differently than it would in English, and I'll show you what's happening. So if you were to just take, and again, I'll try to share. There's a video I did a couple years ago, probably, looking at what I found over a few years of teaching Hebrew is that most students, when they try to translate from Hebrew to English, there's actually two stages that you need to go through translating from Hebrew to English, and most students only do the first stage, and that can often cause some problems. I'll post a link to that video, kind of explaining what those two stages are and how that can help you. But I'll use those two stages here in this explanation. So stage one is generally analyzing the Hebrew words. So it's often best, especially as a beginner, to just do this one word at a time. Analyze one word as fully as you can, and then once you've gotten all the information about that word out, then move on to the next word. Okay, so let's do that here with number one. So when we look at this, if I look at hapeh, what I see is anytime I see a hey at the beginning of a Hebrew word, I think, hey, that might be the Hebrew definite article. And of course, the patak vowel and the dagesh in the next letter confirm, oh, that's probably almost certainly the Hebrew definite article. If I were to remove the hey, patak, dagesh, would I have a Hebrew word that I recognize, a Hebrew noun in particular that I recognize? And what I would have is, well, I guess if I remove the dagesh, it would be fe rather than peh. But the definite article here has made this a dagesh forte. If I remove that, it would go back to what we call a dagesh lene, or the weak dagesh here. And we would have peh. Peh is a word that we have learned. It means mouth. And so what we have here is peh, mouth, with the definite article. So we think of that in English. If we were to have mouth with the definite article, we would say the mouth. That's how it works in English. And it's okay to write that out because you're still in stage one here. Stage one is all about note-taking. So that's word one, the mouth. We could note that it is singular. It also happens to be masculine. I would say that's not obvious from the form, but actually anytime you have a segel hey, like we are trained to recognize comets hey, like we have down here, we pretty readily recognize comets hey as a feminine singular ending. But actually, segel hey is very frequently a masculine singular ending. You don't learn that in the noun chart because, we're trying to give you as little information as possible to make it manageable, but one thing you'll find as you continue to read Hebrew is that if a word ends in segel hey, it tends to be masculine singular. It's not absolute, but it's a good hint. So we could just note that this is actually masculine singular. And then that's really all. I mean, we could say it's a noun, that's another thing we can note about it. And that'll be especially helpful as we move further in translation, because anytime you have a noun in a sentence, another thing you need to think about in stage one is, how is this noun functioning in the sentence? There's a few different ways that a noun can function. Obviously, a noun can be the subject of the verb, the subject of the sentence, but it can also be the direct object. It can be the object of a preposition. There are several different ways that a noun can function. So you might just think about, now we don't have a full sentence here, so we don't need to worry about the function because we probably can't tell what the function is. All we have is a phrase. So we've pretty thoroughly analyzed the first word. If we move to the second word, and I'll use this blank here, so just ignore number two, but I'll use this to keep the info up. If we move on to the second word, again, I see a hey, I think, hey, that might be the Hebrew definite article. Of course, the patak dagesh confirms that, yes, it almost certainly is. If I take off the hey, patak dagesh, I'm left with zeh. And I do recognize zeh as my masculine singular demonstrative. And as soon as I say demonstrative, I'm thinking this or that. Now, zeh is the near demonstrative. So zeh would be this rather than that. And furthermore, zeh is always singular. So if I know that zeh is the masculine singular demonstrative, then it's going to be this. All right. So what I've got then is my demonstrative, but it also has the definite article on it. So does that mean that I should just say, let's do it at the end here. Should I just say the this? And I've got the mouth, the this. This right here, we've analyzed, and again, we could say that, again, here it's functioning attributively, so it's almost like instead of a demonstrative pronoun, this is actually functioning as a demonstrative adjective, because adjectives, attributive functions belong to, I don't want to overcomplicate it, but anyways, we don't need to note anything else here. We've got all the information about this particular sentence or this particular phrase. Most students stop right here, and they just write down the information that they have so far. We translate the mouth, the this. Now, obviously, that doesn't make any sense in English. So some Hebrew students will try to kind of finagle it a little bit into something that makes sense. They might say, well, maybe that means this is the mouth. That way I've got the in there. This is the mouth. The problem is this is the mouth. This is a predicative function. It's not attributive, so that doesn't work. So what does attributive mean? And we know it's attributive. For one, it tells us these are going to be attributive demonstratives. It tells us in the instructions. But even if it didn't tell us, we would have a good idea that this is attributive for a couple different reasons. The first clue that this is attributive is that the adjective, quote unquote, comes after the noun. Hapeh, hazeh. It comes after the noun. And adjectives that come after the noun tend to be attributive. Okay, I know you can't see all that, but the idea here is we're playing off of the A. Adjectives that come after the noun tend to be attributive. So that's a clue right here that this is not functioning predicatively, because usually in a predicative function, the adjective will precede. In a predicative function, the adjective will usually precede, okay? So that's the A and A after attributive precede predicative, okay? So that's a clue. But those are just tendencies. They're not nearly as reliable as the second clue. The second clue here is that there is agreement with regards to definiteness between the noun and the adjective. They agree. They both have the article. That is a much more reliable indicator that this is attributive. Okay, well, I've just explained what you already know. They already told you that this is attributive, but I just wanted to point out, get rid of this guy. I just want to point out that there's a way to determine whether it's attributive or predicative, even if they don't tell you. Okay, so again, we've established that this is attributive. So what does attributive mean? Well, it means that the adjective, again, he's calling this a demonstrative pronoun, I guess from a, I don't know, I mean, I guess it's a pronoun, but if it's attributive, I'm thinking of it as an adjective, okay? And so what do attributive adjectives do? Well, in English, they go right before the noun as a descriptor. So if this is the adjective and this means this, it would go right before the noun. Now the problem is, like you're saying, well, what about the articles? In English, we just never use the article with demonstratives in an attributive function. We never say the this mouth. We never would say the this mouth. We would also never say this the mouth unless we wanted to say this is the mouth. But of course, that's not attributive. That's predicative. The only time we would use this as an adjective for mouth is in this situation, this mouth. So the reason why the articles don't show up in English is not because there's something wrong with the Hebrew. It's because English is actually the less intuitive approach. Because if you're talking about this mouth, you're talking about a very specific mouth, this one, okay? And in English, when we're talking about a specific noun, we generally use the article. But English has this quirk where it never combines the article and a demonstrative. It never uses an article with the word this or that or these or those. It never uses the article when we have this, that, these, or those in an attributive setup. So the answer to your question really has nothing to do with Hebrew. The question, well, why do we have the definite articles here, but they don't show up in the translation? The reason has nothing to do with Hebrew, because these are both definite. In Hebrew and in English, both of these words are definite. But the English just doesn't use that definite article when it creates that sentence. Does that make anywhere close to some kind of sense, or am I just being very confusing?
No, it does, and there's a lot of good stuff in there that was very helpful. And I think that at least for me, like one of the things I'm finding is that the specificity of Hebrew just gets lost in English.
Yeah.
And so whenever I try to bring that over and I'm trying to provide the specificity that the Hebrew has, the English just doesn't do it that way.
Yep.
And so I think that's where some of my confusion is, especially on this specific example.
Yeah, that's exactly, that's actually a very good explanation for one of the benefits of being able to read in Hebrew is you do see, and this is the same for Greek, you see specificity in the Hebrew that the English just can't bring out the same way. And not always is that going to be revolutionary. It's not always going to change the way you see a passage, but there's something to appreciate there. And so that I just take that opportunity to kind of point out, if you stick with it, there are benefits to being able to see something in the text that English just doesn't do it the same way, and so you sometimes miss out on it. But yeah, you're right, there is specificity here that English just doesn't bother with, and so that's why it can be confusing for students, because again, if you just stop at that first step of, let me analyze everything I can about these words, and then you just sort of, your translation is the information you came up with, the first part is analyze the Hebrew. The second part is ask yourself, how would English build this sentence? And you have to think about how English works in order to do that. Now, for most of us, our last English class was maybe high school. I guess college students usually have to take like an English comp class, but you don't really talk about English grammar there. Most of us haven't talked or thought about English grammar since middle school. And so to have to think about how English works can be a challenge sometimes. And that's why a lot of students just kind of guess intuitively, well, I know all the information in Hebrew. How would I say it in English? And that's often fairly, that will often get you quite a ways. But you can also make assumptions there that may not be true. So it does require you to be careful. But the more you practice it, the more intuitive it becomes. You don't have to sit there, like if I wanted to read through, let's say, Genesis 17 here, I wouldn't be thinking to myself, okay, I have to analyze everything about each Hebrew word, and then I have to think, how does English say the same thing? The more you practice it, the more intuitive it becomes, and that's how you build what we call fluency. You're able to flow through the text. It's just you have to put that work in early to kind of build the habit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
All right, so let's take a look here at... we've gone through the practice. Again, what I really want to kind of point out on these attributive demonstratives is that, again, you know they're attributive, first of all, because the demonstrative comes after the noun. That's the less reliable clue, but it's certainly more than half the time it's going to be reliable. But even more reliable is that they agree in definiteness. So you'll notice that every single, exercise here, both words are going to have the definite article. Now, you can also have a situation where neither word has the definite article. In that case, they're also agreeing, but that's a little bit less reliable. But what I want you to be aware of is this pattern that develops, where when they agree, when both have the definite article, that's going to signal an attributive relationship. Again, the key to remember here is that in English, when you have a demonstrative, you just don't use the article. If this were not the demonstrative, if this were something like hapeh hagadol, the large mouth, we would still use the for mouth. So we would have the mouth, the large. Now you might say, again, this is step one. Let's go now to step two, or stage two in translation. How does English build this phrase? If we want to describe a mouth as large, we're talking about a specific mouth, how does English do that? Well, the first thing that we do is we put the adjective before the noun. Large mouth. Now, we want to indicate the definiteness of this phrase, but we don't say large the mouth, because the article never goes between the adjective and the noun in English. The article always introduces, so the large mouth. Here we do have the to indicate that it is definite. But the point is that when you have a demonstrative, demonstratives are by default definite. So you're never going to have a this, like a this man, or a that man, or some those men, or some these men. That's almost an oxymoron. A that man? Well, you just said that man, so you're talking about a specific man. So that's sort of automatically definite. So to say the this man or the this mouth, that's redundant in English. Now it's not redundant in Hebrew because this is the way Hebrew works. But in English, the reason why we don't say the this, the mouth, is because this already tells us that it's definite. We don't need that definite article to tell us. All right, I hope that makes sense. If there are any others of these exercises that you have questions about, please let me know. I'd be happy to go over them with you one-on-one or something like that. Let's take a look at some of these longer ones, 10, 11, and 12. So we have hamilchamot ha'ela. Hamilchamot ha'ela. So again, stage one, analyze individual words. We'll start with the first word here. I see a hey, that might be the Hebrew definite article. I confirm that with the patak dagesh. If I take off the hey patak dagesh, am I left with a Hebrew noun that I recognize? Milchamot. Almost. I didn't learn milchamot. But if I look at milchamot and I ask what is extra, I'll notice a holem vav tav ending. And that holem vav tav ending usually replaces a kametz hey in order to make a feminine noun plural. So if I replace the holem vav tav with a kametz hey, I get milchama. That is a noun that I recognize. Milchama is battle. So we've got battle, but it's plural. So we've got battles. And then we've got the definite article. So this would be something like the battles. We've pretty much analyzed everything we can about this word, so we're going to move on to the next word. Now I've got ha'ela. And again, what do you know? Hey, I've got a hey here. That might be the Hebrew definite article. Now, I don't have a patak dagesh, but I couldn't have a patak dagesh because the next letter is aleph, and aleph is guttural, and gutturals cannot take a dagesh. And so what happens when you put the definite article on a word that begins with a guttural is it rejects the dagesh, and to compensate for the rejection of the dagesh, the patak lengthens to the kametz. So this is the definite article. It's just a different form because we have a guttural here. So hey kametz, if I take that off, do I have a Hebrew word that I recognize? If I take that off, I get ela. And ela is a word that I recognize. We learned this as the plural near demonstrative. So this means these. In Hebrew, the plural near demonstrative doesn't have any gender to it. It's the same form, whether it's masculine or feminine. Just like English. In English, we use these, whether it's for a masculine word or a feminine word. And again, English doesn't really have masculine and feminine because we don't have grammatical gender, but you get the idea here. These, plus the definite article, these. But again, English isn't going to use the definite article here because these is already definite. So what English is going to do is it's going to first put the demonstrative in. English word order, we would put a demonstrative in front of the noun. We don't put demonstratives after the noun. In Hebrew, you put the demonstrative after the noun if it's attributive. But in English, we put the demonstrative in front of the noun. We never say, and again, I'm writing down here, but I'm talking about number 10, we would never say battles these. English doesn't build sentences that way. English puts the demonstrative, especially the attributive demonstrative, because it's functioning as an adjective, it puts the adjective in front of the noun. So we would say these battles. Again, we don't need to say these battles. We don't need to say these the battles. And we definitely don't need to say these the battles, because that's not English. If you want to produce a good English translation, it has to be good English. You can't have a good English translation that is not good English. And these the battles is not good English. These battles is not good English, and these the battles is not good English. So even though they might be literal, those are not good English translations. Looking at number 11 here, we have ha-anashim, ha-tovim, ha-haim. This one's a little bit more complicated, but again, we're going to pace ourselves. We're just going to start going one word at a time. So the first word here, ha-anashim. All right, so I see a hey. Hey, that might be the Hebrew definite article. I'm confirming that with the patach here. I'm sorry, the kametz. There is no patach dagesh because, again, the first letter, or I should say the next letter, is a guttural, so it can't take a dagesh, and as a result, the patach lengthens here. So if I take off the hey kametz, the definite article, am I left with a noun that I recognize? Again, kind of. This was a very tricky one because anashim is actually a separate word from ish. We learned anashim is the plural form of ish, but actually anashim is the plural form of enosh. Ish does not have a plural. So if I want to say men, I have to use a different word for men. Enosh also means man. So I have to use the plural of enosh to say men. So ish means man, enosh means man, but ish doesn't have a plural. So if I want to make ish plural, I have to use the plural of a different word, which is anashim. All right, so if anashim means men, and it has the definite article, then we might just gloss this as the men. That's not a translation. That's a gloss. That's just a translation would be a finalized product. A gloss is sort of like a placeholder word that you put there to kind of just keep all your ducks in a row. So the men would be this first word. Now we're going to move on to the next word. Again, we know that this is a noun. It's actually a masculine plural noun. All right. Then we move on to hot tovim. All right, so hot tovim, hey. That might be the definite article in Hebrew. Hey patach dagesh. Sure enough, that confirms it. If I take those off, do I get a Hebrew word that I recognize? Kind of. I get tovim, which I didn't learn tovim in my vocabulary, but I see a hirik yod mem on the end, and when I see a hirik yod mem, I know that that goes on to the end of a masculine word to indicate plurality. So if I take that off, I get tov, which I do recognize. I do recognize tov as a Hebrew adjective that I've learned. Tov means good, but here it's plural. Good, I'm going to put that S in parentheses, because in English, we don't give number to adjectives. In Spanish, you do. If you wanted to say, I don't know what the word for mug is, but cup, taza, if you wanted to say tazas, big ones, big cups, you would say tazas grandes, I think. You would put a plural ending on the adjective. Same for Hebrew. The number of the noun is going to be reflected in the adjective. So even the adjective gets the em ending, but we don't do that in English. So we wouldn't say goodsmen, we would say good men. But I'm just noting that here because I want to get as much information as I can. And then also it happens to have the definite article, so I could also put the in parentheses here. And I really wish there was a way for me to expand this space here, but the men, the good ones, the goods, and then we have haim. Now haim, I can't remember the order of the lessons here. I don't know if you have learned haim already as a personal pronoun, probably in lesson 5. Let's see here. Yeah, personal pronouns. So haim is probably up here. And we learned that haim was masculine plural for third person, they. Now that I think about it, it's probably easier to just think of the same word having two different meanings. It's really two different functions of one word. All right, but now we've got our first word. I'm going to draw a little line here so I can separate it. Then we've got our second word, draw a line, and now we're going to do haim. Again, hey, we've got a word that begins with a hey. Hey, that might be the Hebrew definite article. Sure enough, I've got a kametz here, which again, I wouldn't have a dagesh because hey is a guttural. So we lose the dagesh, and we lengthen the patach to a kametz to compensate. If I take that off, do I get a Hebrew word I recognize? Haim. Yes, I do recognize haim. In this case, as the masculine plural far demonstrative. So those, all right? So we're going to say those. It's got an article on it, so I'll just put the in parentheses. And now I've fully analyzed every word in this phrase. So let's look at it and ask ourselves, how does English build this together? What are we actually looking at? Well, we're looking at a noun that is being modified by an adjective, attributively. The noun means men. The meaning of the adjective is good. And then the meaning of this word is the far demonstrative meaning. So which English word do I use as a demonstrative for masculine plural? Well, the English far demonstrative doesn't have gender, so it's the same whether it's masculine or feminine, but the plural far demonstrative, the that in the plural in English, is those. So this would be, because it is attributive, we ask ourselves, English, when you want to modify a noun and add a demonstrative, what order do you put these in? Well, do we ever say, we already know that if we have a demonstrative, we're not going to use the, because the demonstrative is already definite. So we can throw out the. But do we ever say, good those men? Or do we ever say, those men good? Only if it's predicative that we might say those men are good, but this is not predicative, this is demonstrative. This is attributive. In order to say this phrase attributively, English has to put the demonstrative first, those, and then it picks the adjective, because the adjective comes before the noun in English, those good, and then you get the subject, those good men. So that's how we would translate number 11 here. All right, a lot of time on that, so we won't look at number 12 here as well. But what I'm trying to point out here is in this two stages of English, or I should say this two stages of translating Hebrew into English. The first stage is analyzing the word as much as you can, finding out what's going on there, and asking questions about how these words are functioning together. So that's where we ask the question about, is this attributive, is this predicative? That's all stage one. Now in stage two, we have to ask, how does English build this phrase or this sentence or whatever it is? And if we have a demonstrative plus an adjective plus a noun in English, that's the order we're going to put it in. We're going to put the demonstrative first, we're going to put the adjective right directly before the noun, and then the noun comes last. And if we have a demonstrative, we do not use the article the, those good men. All right, let's take a couple of the predicate ones, because again, that's going to be built differently in English. So let's just jump down here to the bottom, number 8 and number 9. Now again, he tells us that these are predicate, he tells us that these are predicative functions, but even if he didn't tell us, we could figure it out pretty easily based on what we see here. Again, here the demonstrative precedes the noun. And if the demonstrative precedes the noun, then it's predicative, usually. Furthermore, if we look at the demonstrative and the noun, there is no agreement when it comes to the definiteness of them. Since there is disagreement here, that's going to indicate that this is a predicative relationship. So, ze habait, we know that the first word, ze, is the near masculine singular demonstrative, and in English, the near masculine singular demonstrative is this, okay? So we know that that first word is this. Since it does not have the article, we know that it cannot be, or it almost certainly is not, in an attributive relationship. It's in a predicative relationship. So we're just going to put pred here, just so we know how it's functioning with the noun. Now we look at the second word here, and we have habayit. Hey, that might be the definite article. Hey, patak dagesh. Sure enough, if I pull those off, I'm left with bite. Bite is the word that I learned in Hebrew for house. Now house, this also sometimes gets translated as temple, that's fine, whatever. Usually you only translate this as temple in the context of a god. So if the house belongs to a deity or to a god, then you might say temple. You wouldn't say, if this was, I'd have to change the grammar here to make it the house of the sun, but if it was the house of the sun, you wouldn't say the temple of the sun. You would say the house here. But again, bayit is house. It happens to be masculine singular, and it happens to have the article on it, so it's definite. So all of that, again, let's just say def dot masculine. I wish I would put it all together. So anyways, house, all right? So in English, if we just stop here, because again, this has the definite article, if we just say this, the house, that's not correct, because this is not how we say something like this in English. Furthermore, well, let's just stop there, because again, we have to make this predicative. We have to include some sort of to be verb here to bring this out. So what you have to decide is, I don't think there's ever going to be a situation where the demonstrative is not the subject here. Like, you're never going to get the house is this. I don't think that is something you need to worry about. So by default, when you've got a demonstrative and a predicative relationship, I think you can assume that the demonstrative is the subject. So the subject, and again, this is where we get into English sentences. English, how do you build a sentence? What do you start with when you're building a sentence? English starts with the subject. Okay, so the subject is this. Here, this is I guess the house is what is predicated here, but this, and then in a predicative relationship, we insert the to be verb here. Okay, so if this is singular and it's third person, what verb do we use in English for present singular third person? We use is. Now I say present. Technically speaking, in a verbless clause like this or a predicative relationship, there is no tense, so you might be able to say was, but we're just going to go with is as default here. So this, the house. Now we can say this is the house. We don't need to say this is house like we did with the attributive. In the attributive, we didn't include the definite article because to include it would be redundant. Those or this or whatever is already definite, so we don't add the definite article in addition. But we do retain the definite article here. This is the house because it's not an attributive relationship. Now I said we're going to look at 8 and 9, and we just looked at number 1. So let's look at number 9 here. Zeh hamelech. Again, one step at a time. Zeh. Zeh is the masculine singular near demonstrative. What is the masculine singular near demonstrative in English? It's this, all right? So that's really all we need to put here is this. Now we note that it does not have the article, and the noun does. When you have that mismatch, that's going to tell you that this should be predicative. So again, we're just going to put in parentheses is here. Then we look at our noun. Again, only when it's attributive do we omit the article on a definite noun. This is not attributive, this is predicative. So we have hamelech hey. That might be the Hebrew definite article. Patak dagesh, if we take that off, do we get a Hebrew noun we recognize? Yeah, we get melech, which is king. So we have king plus the. This is the king. Now again, pause, because we're still in stage one. We're still in stage one. We're just analyzing the words. We now need to go to stage two, which is to ask ourselves, how would English build this phrase? And English would say, it would begin with the predicative demonstrative, this, and then we would insert the verb, is, and then we would insert the articular noun, the king. So in this case, stage two doesn't really change anything. You know, if we just put what we got, then we actually are good. This is the king. That's exactly what we would say. But you still need to check, is what I've got here from just analyzing the words, is that actually good English? It turns out it is. Okay, good. But it ain't always. So don't think that you can just put a period at the end of your analysis and you've got an English sentence. You need to check and make sure, is this good English? And in this case it is, so you're good. All right, so section C here, just checking whether or not the construction is predicative or attributive. And again, the telltale is going to be the agreement in article. If you see a noun with the article but a demonstrative without the article, you know it's predicative. If you see a noun with the article and a demonstrative with the article, you know it's attributive. So that's pretty straightforward right there. All right, let's look at section G here. And I like to cover these up just because I don't want to be staring right at the answer while I'm looking at them. But let's just take a couple of these. In fact, let's look at the longer ones. I guess number 5 would be good. Let's just look at number 5 here. All right, so looking at number 5, again, I'm just going to go one word at a time, and I'm going to give myself some space to write here. All right, so first word here, we've got the bait preposition, which, you know, usually means in, at, with, can mean a lot of different things, but that's the bait preposition. And I noticed that it has a kametz underneath of it. So this is not a shava. That tells me that there's probably a definite article here. Let's dig into that and verify. If there were a definite article here, the bait would basically just be covering up the hay, and you would still have whatever value you would expect for the definite article. So if we convert that bait back into a hay, and we ask, is this the definite article, does it all make sense? So you would usually expect the hay patak dagesh, but again, your next letter is a guttural, and the guttural is going to reject the dagesh, which explains why the patak would have lengthened to a kametz. So here, the bait is covering the hay. It means in, at, or with. We'll decide more what it means when we get more context. But yes, we do have a definite article here. So we are going to put in parentheses the, and then we'll look at the noun that's left over, ate. All right, so what does ate mean? Is that a noun that we recognize? Now, I always get ate, aish, and ates confused. I'm pretty sure ate means time. Aish, I think, means fire, and I think ates means wood or tree or something like that. I'm pretty sure 8 means time. I'm going to peek and check here. Number 5, time. Okay, I am correct. All right, so here I'm just going to put the gloss time. And what we've got, if we wanted to gloss this entire phrase, we would have something like either in the time, or at the time, or with the time. With the time doesn't make a whole lot of sense, so I'm going to eliminate that. In the time could work, depending on the rest of the context, and at the time could work, so I'm going to leave those. But now I'm going to move on to my next word, all right? And so next I have, hey, that might be the Hebrew definite article. Hey, patak, no dagesh. But again, the guttural can't take a dagesh. We would usually see compensatory lengthening here, but we know that sometimes when the definite article goes on hey or het, you get something called virtual doubling, which is not really doubling at all. And so sometimes it just remains a patak. All right, so good enough. That explains it. Looks like we've got the definite article here. I'm going to do the in parentheses. And then if I take that off, what Hebrew word do I have here? Do I recognize this? And I have he. Okay, confusingly enough, the Hebrew word he means she. All right, so we're just going to put she. Now remember, when it comes to demonstratives, singular, not even singular, far demonstratives in Hebrew, they use the personal pronouns. So this could be she, or it could be that, or that one. All right, so we'll keep going and we'll see what we can find out here. All right, so we've got this word analyzed. Now we're going to move on to the next word. And we've got this one's hard for me to say with the dalet and the resh right together. Tidrosh. Tidrosh. That's hard to say because the resh in Hebrew, if I want to say tidrosh, that's no problem, but the Hebrew R is not like our R. It's like it's more of a tap. Resh. So if I say tidrosh, and then I put them together, tidrosh, that's hard to say. But tidrosh, if I look at this, I'm going to ask myself, what in the world am I looking at? I don't recognize this form immediately. So chances are, if I'm at a loss, it's either going to be what I've not run into, which is unlikely in Futato exercises, or it's going to be some sort of conjugated verb. So let's just go with the assumption that this is a conjugated verb. I will also link a video to, I think I have a video walking through the steps of parsing a verb. You can really break this down into certain steps that if you follow these each time, it really makes parsing verbs a lot simpler. But I'll kind of go through that here as we look at Tid Rosh. All right, so how many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? A Hebrew verbal root almost always has 3 letters. Now, sometimes, as we'll learn later on in this semester, one of those letters is a vowel letter, but it's still a letter. All right, so if we're going to get to the root here, we got to figure out which of these 4 letters are the 3 root letters. Which, it gets complicated actually, because we may not actually have 3 root letters left. But my question is, how many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do I have? I have 4. So something is extra, okay? At least one letter is extra. So what's extra here? Well, if I look at the end, I see a shin. Is shin ever used as a verbal suffix? Not that we've learned. So shin is almost certainly part of our root. All right, so if there's nothing added to the end, maybe there's something that's added to the beginning. When do we add prefixes to verbs? That's in the imperfect conjugation. So maybe I have an imperfect verb here. Now, when I add prefixes to imperfect verbs, there are going to be one of 4 letters that function as a prefix. It's either going to be yod, tav, aleph, or nun. And so here I have a tav. So that makes sense. This might be an imperfect with a tav prefix. I can confirm that by looking at what we suppose to be the prefix vowel, and that is a hiric. And of course, in the cal imperfect, the prefix vowel usually is going to be a hiric, and then the first root letter will have a shavah under it to close that syllable. If that's the case, then what we end up with here is the tav hiric prefix and the root being dalet resh shin. Now, have I learned a vocabulary word that is a Hebrew verb, dalet resh shin? I have. Darash is to inquire, I believe. My mnemonic for that is he inquired as to the source of darash. He had darash on his arm, and he inquired, or he questioned, as to the cause of darash. That may be a terrible memory aid for you, but it stuck with me for about 10 years, so I use it. Darash is to seek, or to question, or to look for, or to inquire. It's this sort of like questioning pursuit. Darash. All right, well, if darash means he sought or he inquired, then tid rosh in the imperfect, what we have to first figure out is this first, second, third, masculine or singular, masculine, feminine, common, singular or plural. So let's finish parsing this out. We know that it's imperfect. We know it's cal imperfect because cal is the only imperfect we've learned. Cal imperfect. And then which of the cal imperfects have a tav prefix with no suffix? There are actually 2. This form could be either the 3fs form or the 2ms form. So we're going to put both of those here as options because we don't know which one it is yet. So this could be either she will inquire is the word I'm going to use, or it could be you will. And I'm actually going to put masculine singular in parentheses. You will inquire. Could be either of those. We got to keep going to find out. Now, what I notice here is Hebrew sentences tend to start with the main verb. And that was not the case here. We had 2 words before the main verb. That usually happens when you have some sort of like temporal some sort of temporal phrase or temporal modifier. And temporal modifiers tend to have a time word, a temporal word, and the bait preposition. Sometimes the cough preposition as well. So I can probably take these 2 words as a phrase and think through how they're functioning together before we move into the main verb. So if I go back up here and I just look at these, the information for these 2 words, I have in the time or at the time, the she or the that one. That's a little bit tricky. But if I recognize that what we've really got here is a definite noun, remember this was definite, the definite article here, definite noun, and potentially a definite demonstrative, this could be an attributive function of the far demonstrative with a noun. And in that case, it would be that, again, attributive, we don't need one, that modifying time inside of a prepositional phrase. So this would either be in that time or at that time. At that time sounds a little bit more natural, at least to me, in English, so I'm going to go with at that time. And then this stuff is, I'm not going to ignore it, I guess, or delete it, but we can move on. So we've got at that time is this phrase right here. Again, we may modify this when we come back to stage 2, which is how would English build this, but for now, we've come to the end of this temporal phrase because now we've got a verb. So now we can back up and clarify what this phrase actually means. All right, so our verb now says, will inquire. Now, the particular form means that it's either she will inquire or you will inquire. There is no noun here in Hebrew, but this form suggests, it implies a certain subject. And in English, we need that subject, so that's why we have. In fact, I'm just going to put these in parentheses because these words are not there in Hebrew. We're going to add them. So at that time, someone will inquire. Moving on to the next word. Now, inquire isn't going to work because inquire does not take a direct object in English, and we do have a direct object, so we'll have to use a different gloss for this. So we'll just do seek, because seek can take a direct object. Now, when we see what this direct object is, maybe we'll change it again. Maybe seek doesn't work, but we're gonna keep moving here. So the next one, et ha Elohim. So et here, plus the definite article, is going to tell me that whatever this word is, it is my direct object. Direct object. And obviously Elohim is God, so God is the direct object, the object of seek. And that does make sense. Someone will seek God. And then we've got ha-kayim. So we have ha-Elohim, and then we have ha-kayim. Well, kayim is from chai, which is an adjective. It means alive or living. Alive, living. Now this happens to be in the plural form, and it's definite. All right. So when you have a definite adjective with a definite noun, that's probably going to be attributive. We've got our definite article. We've got our adjective functioning attributively. Now we'll move on to the next word here. We've got the bait, presumably the bait preposition. We've got a bait shava, so we're going to go in, at, with, could be any of those. And then we have kol. Kol is the construct form of this word kol. So let me clarify. This is not kol. This is not a kametz. This is a kametz chatuf. This is the short O sound. Kol. And we know that because this is unaccented. This makef here tells us that it is joined to the following word, so it loses its accent, and it's a closed syllable. So when you have this symbol in an unaccented closed syllable, you know it's kametz chatuf. Right? So kol, when it is unaccented, is going to be shortened. The construct form becomes kol, oops, with the kametz chatuf there, and that means all. Okay? So this is in, at, or with all. Oops, sorry, I'm still in Hebrew. In, at, with, all of, because it's in construct, all of. This one's a little, whoop, I just gave the answer there. This one's a little bit tricky because it's an unusual form. We've got lamed hirik bait with a dagesh, shava, kaf, kametz. If this is hard to recognize for you, I don't blame you. Let's break it up. We've got a lamed, we've got a bait, we've got a kaf. When you come across a word that you don't recognize, it could just be a totally new word, but that's probably not going to happen in your workbook. He's going to give you stuff you've seen before. So assuming that we have seen something here, we can ask ourselves about prefixes and suffixes that might be changing this from something that we recognize. Do we ever have lamed as a prefix? We do. If lamed is a prefix, it usually is the preposition for to or for or something like that. Of course, bait often functions as a prefix, but it doesn't come after lamed. So bait is either part of a suffix or part of the root, and we don't really have any suffixes with bait that we've run into. So bait is probably part of the root. Then we've got kaf. So unless bait is just the root itself, which every word we've come across that is not a prefix or suffix, like the bait preposition, bait isn't going to be there by itself. So maybe the root here is bait kaf. The problem is that isn't something that we've run into either. Bait kaf as a root. That's not something we've seen. Now, I don't know if we've come across the verb baka yet, bait kaf hey, particularly kametz hey. That might make some sense here, but we would be losing the hey, and we would have a lamed preposition on a verb which we haven't run into yet. So that's probably not what we're looking at. So if kaf doesn't quite work as the root, could kaf be functioning as a suffix? Well, we have run into the kaf kametz as the 2ms possessive suffix. So this could be your bait, whatever bait stands for. So this could be the 2ms possessive suffix. But we still don't know what the root is here. Oh boy, good enough. What is the root? I mean, if lamed is the prefix and kaf kametz is the suffix, and we're just left with bait, what could it be? Well, we already know that kaf isn't part of the root, because bait kaf doesn't make sense. But we've kind of assumed that lamed is a prefix instead of thinking maybe lamed is part of the root. I mean, with no other option, maybe we've got a kaf kametz suffix and a lamed bait root. So we ask ourselves, what Hebrew words have we learned that have a lamed and a bait in the root? And of course we've got lavav, which means heart, but we've only got one bait here. But if you paid attention to the notes in your vocabulary, you'll note that lavav often gets shortened to lave. Furthermore, when we have a suffix on lave, we get that dogish forte in here. And it just so happens that when you get a suffixed form of lave, that sere is going to shift usually to a hirik here. It wants that short vowel because this is a closed syllable, okay? And so we want a short vowel there rather than the sere. Actually, it wouldn't be sere, maybe it would be segel. Either way, this is something that commonly happens with the word for heart, is you get a hirik in there when you've got a suffix. So if that's the case, then this would be heart. We're going to cross out 2 or 4 because we decided that lamed is part of the root. The 2ms possessive suffix goes on heart. Heart. All right, so what is the pronoun we use in English for a second person masculine singular possessive? What is our possessive pronoun? So second person would be you. Masculine, it's the same, you all over. Masculine singular, you. But if it's possessive, it's going to be your. So this would be your heart. All right. So now we've got libecha. At all of your heart in all of your heart or with all of your heart? Well, this is a prepositional phrase, probably modifying the main verb. So seek in all of your heart or with all of your heart? Probably with all of your heart. But again, we'll come back to that in stage 2. All of your heart. Now we've got a new word. It begins with a shurek. Anytime we have a word that begins with a shurek, let's just say at this point, that's probably going to be the vav conjunction. So this is going to be and. And we know that and, the vav here, it becomes a shurek. This is called the bump rule. And I like, actually, let's do it like this. B, lowercase u, MP. Anytime the vav is attached to a bait, a mem, or a pay, it's going to go to the u sound. That's the bump rule. So this would be uv, or oop, or oof, okay? Excuse me. So, and, then we've got, vechal. So is vechal a word that we recognize? Vechal is not a word that I have learned. So what else might we have here? Do we have a prefix or a suffix? Well, the bait could function as a prepositional prefix. This again, in, at, or with. If we take that off, what are we left with? Whole, not hal, but whole. That's what we had over here. So with all of your heart and with all of naf shecha. Naf shecha. Now again, we've got that kametz, that kaf kametz suffix here. Kaf kametz suffix. So maybe this is your again. If it is, and we take that off, we've got nun, pei, shen. Ignore the vowels for now. Just look at the root letters. Do you know a Hebrew word whose root is nun, pei, shen? And we know the word nefesh. Nefesh is the word for life or soul, or could even be person. Here in context, it's probably going to make more sense as your soul. Okay? So we've gone through all of the words. We've analyzed all the words. We've talked about the function of the words. Now we need to ask ourselves, how does English build this sentence? So if we go back up to the top, we will recognize that we have a temporal clause. All right? So English, when you build a sentence, what do you want first? Well, English generally wants the subject first. So what is the subject of this sentence? Well, there is no explicit subject in Hebrew, so we're going to have to go to the verb, and we're going to have to ask what subject is implied by the verb. So this verb form, it could be either you will seek or she will seek. Which one is it? Well, in context, it's probably, let's just put it this way, this form of the verb, with the tav prefix with no suffix, it's much more frequently second person masculine singular than it is third person feminine singular. So it's most likely going to be you, but both are possible. There's nothing in the context that would eliminate the third feminine singular as a possibility. So you could translate this as she will seek if you want to. But we do have second person pronouns down here. And since these prepositional phrases are modifying the verb, it probably makes most sense to match the possessive pronoun with the person of the verb. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to say, she will seek with all of your heart, or with all of your soul. It probably makes more sense to say, you will seek with all of your heart and with all your soul. So that's what we're going to go with. Again, we're in stage 2 now. And we're asking English, how do you build a sentence? English says, I want the subject first. So we went back and we looked and said, what is our subject? So we're going to determine that the subject is you, masculine singular. You, English, what do you want after the subject? English says, I want the main verb. Okay, what's the main verb? As we go back up here, dorosh, tid rosh is our main verb. It means will seek. So now we've got that. Okay, great. English, you've got your subject, you've got your main verb. What do you want next? English says, give me any direct object you might have. Okay, so we go back to our sentence and we look for our direct object. Here's our definite direct object marker, so we know that we've got a direct object here, God, but we also saw that God here is matched with this adjective. Masculine, plural, and they're both articular, so that means we've got an attributive relationship. So English, how do you order? What's the order that you put an attributive phrase, attributive adjective plus noun? Well, the first thing that you're going to do is usually, if it's definite, you would put the in there, and then you would put the adjective, so we would have living, or alive, but alive doesn't work here, living God. You will seek the living God. All right, so that's our direct object. English, what do you want after the direct object? Usually English will then take any indirect object that you have. Usually in Hebrew, an indirect object will be marked with probably the preposition lamed. That's probably how you're going to get an indirect object. We don't have that here. There's no indirect object. So now English says, okay, give me whatever else you have. Now we can kind of sort through. So let's go back to the beginning because we haven't done anything with this phrase yet. This is that temporal phrase. Now English can take a temporal phrase at the beginning of the sentence, but temporal phrases can go in a lot of places. So we could stick it here. You will seek the living God at that time. And then we could move on to these prepositional phrases, which are with all of your heart and with all of your soul. But the Hebrew word order also works in English. You could say, at that time, comma, you will seek the living God with all of your heart and with all of your soul. Both of those work. They both work in English. They're both good English. It's probably more frequent. You're going to see that temporal clause at the beginning. A lot of times English will introduce a sentence with a temporal clause or temporal phrase, just like Hebrew does here. Let's see what Futato did with it. So he starts with the temporal phrase, at that time, you, masculine singular, will seek the living God with all your heart. He does not put the of there, which is fine. To me, to put the of there kind of reiterates that this is a construct, but he doesn't use it, so that's fine. With all your heart and with all your soul. Perfect. All right. So again, that's the 2 stages, and I belabored it here. I hope it doesn't take you that long to translate a sentence in Hebrew, because you've got 10 of them here with all your other, I guess 8, with all of your other assignments. But I'm going to go through that very meticulously so you can see all of the steps in detail of how to go from stage 1, which is analyze each Hebrew word, which we did here, and then stage 2, ask English how to build the sentence. And you could just say build the sentence in English, but I like this idea of checking in with the language. Hey, English, what do you want first in a sentence? And generally that's the subject. So hopefully that's helpful for you. We'll finish up by doing some of these I'll just do one translation here. I've got Genesis 17 pulled up, so we'll do that. All right, so as we look at this, we'll just kind of go through here. I'll pull my notes back up. All right, so walking through here, the first word we see, by the way, you're going to see a lot of extra markings on these sentences that you're not used to. Most of these are Hebrew accents, and the accents are used for a few different purposes. You're not learning those because they don't usually affect the grammar. Sometimes they assist you with the grammar, but they don't usually affect the grammar. So we're not going to pay a lot of attention to them in Hebrew. The first year of Hebrew, you learn more about them in year 2. So this little backwards L looking thing, you can ignore that. That is an accent, but just don't worry about it. Okay, so we have zot. Zot we know is our masculine, actually this is our feminine singular near demonstrative. All right, feminine singular near demonstrative. So in English, what is our feminine singular near demonstrative? Well, just like our masculine singular, it's going to be this. Okay. So we have this, and then our next word, there's really nothing else to analyze here. We could note that it lacks the article, so if it goes with a noun, it would probably, well, it would depend on whether it agrees with that noun. So let's just move on to the next and see what we run into here. So we've got Bree-T. Okay, Bree-T. This is something that we've not seen before. We'll call this pre-learning. We'll get a little bit of a preview of things that we'll learn in the future. So Bree-T, do you recognize anything about this? I mean, you've got a bait at the beginning with a shabah. That could be a bait preposition. But then re-T would have to be the noun. Maybe hirik yod is the possessive suffix. So maybe reet is something. In my, whatever reet would be. But it turns out none of that is the case here. What we've got here is a verb. This is the verb. Again, I'll do my large. This is the verb bara. I know that's not very easy to see, but bara here. Bara is a verb that means he created, he made, that sort of a thing. Bara. Now, bara, because it ends with a comma hey, it's an irregular verb. We're going to learn about third hey verbs later on this semester, and what third hey verbs have a tendency to do is avoid suffixes. Hey itself is a weak letter, and it really doesn't like getting in between suffixes and its root, kind of no matter where it is. You've seen this a little bit even with prefixes, how when you have an articular noun, the definite article, and you put a prepositional prefix, the prepositional prefix just kind of covers over the hey. It doesn't want to be there. It tends to get smushed by these suffixes. So one of the things that happens is when you have a consonantal suffix, which is what T is, you'll remember that in the cow perfect, T is the suffix we use for first common singular. T. So katal T would be I killed. Now you're used to seeing a dagesh in this T. That's a weak dagesh, by the way. But that dagesh is removed because the sound preceding this is a vowel sound. So there's no need for the weak dagesh here. So that drops out. But this is still the 1cs suffix for the cow perfect of bara. But what the hey does here is it's going to shift into a hirik yod. All right, that's why we have the hirik yod here, is that comma hey, it doesn't like the suffix, so it's going to shift into a, well, I guess comma hey is a vowel, but it's going to shift before a consonantal suffix. Third hey verbs shift their hey, their comma hey, into a hirik yod. And so what we get is a shortening here. I shouldn't say shortening, a reduction here, bariti. That's because the suffix here is going to have the accent. Now, this isn't normal. This has to do with the construction, but because the accent that's marked here by these 2 curves, I guess you could say, because the accent is on the final syllable, and this bait is actually, the word for this is pre-tonic. The tonic is the syllable with the accent. Pretonic is the syllable before the accent, and pro-pretonic is the syllable before the syllable with the accent. This is called pro-pretonic reduction. When you have a syllable that is twice removed from the accent, often it will reduce to a shavah. Right? So if bara means he made, or he created, barati, or bariti rather, would be I created. All right, so this we're going to change to I created. All right. Next we have assure, which is just our relative pronoun. So again, for the relative pronoun, I tend to use as my gloss the word which. I may change that later to that, who, whom, whatever, but I like to go with which just because it covers a lot of bases there. Let me get rid of this guy. All right, so which. Next we've got tish maru. Tish maru. If you can't tell, you've got shamar right in there. I'm not going to go through all the steps of parsing just because we already did that, but here you can see the verb shamar. You've got a tav prefix and a shuric suffix, so that is going to be the 2MP form of the cal imperfect of shamar, which is basically you all will hear. Okay. B'nai, I should say b'nai. This is going to be b'ni. B'ni. Okay, so this can't be the noun son, because the noun son doesn't have the sere yod. It would just be, and honestly, b'nai would be a sere here and a shavah here. So this is going to be the preposition bain, and it's going to have a 1cs suffix. Bain as a preposition means between, so this would be between 1cs, between me. Shurik with a bait, this is going to be the and conjunction, the vav conjunction, and beinechem. So beini u veinechem is going to be between me and between you all, masculine plural. Then we have uvein, so again, and between, zar acha, zar racha. Here we have that kaf kamet suffix, which is 2ms, your, and zar acha, zar, I don't know how to say that, there's no sound for the I in here, but this root is from zera. Zera is the word for seed or offspring. So your offspring, and between your offspring, between me and between you all, and between your seed, achrecha. Again, we've got that cha suffix, you, or your. Here it's this is a preposition. So this is not going to be your, because it's a preposition, it's going to be you. But what is the preposition? This is from acher, or achrei, which means after. So this is going to be between me and between you all, and between your seed after you, himol. Now this is one that you're not going to recognize at all. Here we've got I think this is just a noun. You can see the dagesh here. I don't see any reason. Oh, himol. Okay. Oh yeah, I forgot about the nifal. Okay, so mol here, it says this is going to be for the verb circumcise. The hirik, the hey hirik with the dagesh, this is going to indicate nifal. This you can see, I can't hold it there, but you'll see as I move, all of these words pop up down here. You can see that it says nifal infinitive construct. Again, we'll get to the nifal, we'll get to the infinitive construct. This is also what we call a hollow verb. So it does have 3 letters, mem, vav, lamed, but one of those letters is a vowel letter. So these have some strange conjugation patterns that they follow. But this basically means more like to be circumcised. For you, all of zachar. Now I want to say zachar is remember, but this is the word for male. So this is a verb. Zachar is a verb that means remember, but it would have a patach here. Here, zachar, just the patach, that's the word for male. So not all of, this would be every male. So if we put this all together again, we've got this. Now this is referring back to a word in the previous sentence because it's feminine. Bariti, I have done, I have made, I have created. Oh no, Brit, this is my covenant. So this is why it's feminine. That's interesting. I do think it would still be Brit. Oh, that's why. Okay, that's why the accentuation is different. It would be the exact same letters and vowels, but if the accent were on the second syllable, then this would be the verb. Since it's on the final syllable, it's the noun. Briti. Briti is my covenant. So here we've got, this is, even though you don't see the definite article, you know that this word is definite because it has a possessive pronoun. And there are 3 ways that a Hebrew noun can be definite. It can have the article, it can have a possessive pronoun, or it can be in construct. All of those are automatically definite. I should say in construct with a definite noun. I guess another way, a 4th way, would be if it's a if it's a proper noun, it would be definite. So 4 ways a noun can be definite in Hebrew. The most obvious, it has a definite article, but if it has a possessive suffix, it's also definite and it will lack the article. If it is in construct with a definite noun, it will be definite, and if it's a proper noun, it will be definite. All right, so here, since this is definite and zot is not, zot lacks the article, there's going to be a predicative relationship. This is my covenant. Berit is covenant, 1cs, possessive suffix. This is my covenant, which You will shamar. You will keep. I think I said here before. That's shema, not shamar. Yeah, you all will hear. No, you all will keep. Shema with the I in here is here. This is my covenant which you all will keep between me and between you all, and between your seed after you, to be circumcised for you or to you every. Oh, this is actually, it's kind of a roundabout way of indicating possession. So to you all means yours. You all's is every male to you all. Every male, you might say among you all, but all of your males, basically. So this is my covenant which you all will keep between me and between you and between your seed after you, to be circumcised every male belonging to you, is the idea. Whew. Okay, well, that was a long one. So many questions. I'm going to shut it down. Take care.